questions or comments via email. You may email your comments to info@gosbcta.com. Good morning, everyone. For those of you just joining us, welcome to the second annual SBCTA State of Transportation. Our presentation will begin this morning at 9:40. We're just waiting a few moments while folks are admitted from the waiting room. Great to see so many faces. Thank you all for activating your cameras. Let's give each other a wave. We're all on mute, but good to see you all. Hope you're doing well, staying safe. Good morning. Hi, everyone. Another reminder, the presentation will be recorded this morning. As everyone enters in from the waiting room, a few reminders. If you are joining us today, you will be on mute for the duration of the presentation. Following our panel discussion, we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers, and we welcome your questions via the chat function. So we'll make an announcement, but towards the end of the presentation, if you do have questions for our panelists, feel free to submit them via chat. You can find the chat function at the bottom of your screen, click on the chat icon, and select Tim Watkins' name from the drop-down menu. His should be the first name that you see. Please only direct your questions to Tim, as he's the only one that's monitoring those to group them and address them to our panel members for answers. In addition, we'd also like to recommend on the view setting, when our panel begins, please select in the top right corner of your screen, speaker view. So in the top right corner of your screen, you should see an icon that says view. From the drop down, be sure to select speaker view. This will highlight whoever is speaking as the prominent face on your screen. And you can also see other members that are joining our meeting this morning. But we want to encourage you to select speaker view, as this will highlight whoever is speaking more prominently on your screen. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. If you are just joining us, thank you for being here for the second annual SBCTA State of Transportation. We'll begin presenting this morning at 9:40. We're just giving folks a few moments to join us from the waiting room. And a reminder, everyone is on mute for the duration of the presentation, but your video screens are active. So feel free to give a wave, nod along when you hear some things that you like, give a pensive face as our panel members discuss important issues facing the industry. We hope you're all doing well and staying safe. Thank you so much for taking time out of your morning to join us today. Another reminder, the presentation will be recorded if you are just joining us. And we'll just give a few moments for folks to log on. We'll be getting started at 9:40. A reminder for everyone, you will not be able to unmute yourself during the presentation. However, following our panel, we welcome you to submit any questions or comments via the chat function. You'll find the chat icon at the bottom of your screen. When you click that, you can select Tim Watkins from the drop-down menu. His should be the first name that you see. Please only direct the questions to Tim, as he is the one that is helping us to monitor the questions that are coming in and deliver them to our panel members. If you are dialing in this morning and you're unable to access the chat function, we also welcome you to submit your questions or comments via email. You can send those to info@ go SBCTA.com. A reminder, this morning's presentation is being recorded and we'll be getting started at 9:40. We're just giving folks a few moments to join us from the waiting room and we'll be getting started shortly. If you have just joined us, good morning. Welcome to the second annual SBCTA State of Transportation. So wonderful to see so many of your faces. A reminder, if you're just joining us from the waiting room, everyone will be on mute for the duration of this morning's presentation. However, your videos are active so that we can nod along and smile at each other since we don't get to be in person this morning. A reminder, our presentation is being recorded and we'll be getting started in just a moment at 9:40. One more reminder, if you are just joining us, we recommend setting your view to speaker view for this morning's presentation. In the top right corner of your screen, select view, and from the drop-down menu, select speaker. This will highlight whoever is speaking with a prominent position on your screen. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the second annual SBCTA State of Transportation. It's so wonderful to see you all here. We thank you for taking time out of your day to join us for this wonderful panel. To go ahead and get us started this morning, we're very honored today to be joined by a special guest, Mr. Frank Navarro. Mayor Navarro is the current SBCTA board president, and as mayor of the city of Colton, he represents the city on the board of directors. His passion for transportation is evident by his involvement in multiple regional councils and commissions throughout our region, including the Southern California Association of Governments. Please help me welcome the Honorable Frank Navarro to begin the 2020 SBCTA State of Transportation. Mayor Navarro.
Thank you, Marissa, and good morning. And allow me to again welcome you to SBCTA's second annual State of Transportation. Normally, this event would be held in person. It would be an in-person activity during our business to business expo. However, due to COVID-19 restrictions, we are now presenting this portion in a virtual environment. This is really an exciting time for me as president of SBCTA and supporting board members in being part of the current and future transportation program activities here at SBCTA. Projects, projects that are innovative and that bring new technologies to the table in transportation and transit services. Today's panel presentation, moderated by our executive director, Dr. Ray Wolf, and featuring key staff members of SBCTA professionals and experts in their own fields, will bring you up to date on our many and varied projects and introduce innovation and projects that are standard in process but bring improvements in transportation, transit, and jobs. Again, welcome and enjoy your time here with us.
Thank you, President Navarro. My name is Ray Wolf, the Executive Director of the San Bernardino County Transportation Authority. I would like to echo President Navarro's sentiments by thanking all of you for participating in our virtual State of Transportation. While we aren't able to meet in person as we had all hoped, we felt it imperative that we employ today's technology to keep the conversation with you, our external partners, alive. My team quickly reacted to the pandemic and leveraged technology to ensure that we didn't miss a beat in delivering the programs and projects so important to the daily lives of the residents of our beautiful county and the businesses that keep the economic wheels churning. You'll hear all about the great things underway in a few moments. I'm truly excited to highlight the innovations we are leading. For years, I have spoken about the looming disruption that rapid advances in technology would bring to the transportation world. Today, we have the opportunity to begin implementing some of these new ideas, and it's really exciting. The SBCTA Board of Directors should be applauded for their vision. Our highly qualified team has done an incredible job advancing innovative ideas towards reality in a relatively short period of time. Our work is only just beginning, but now let me turn to the smart people who are so integral to leading our success. Joining me today is Otis Greer, Director of Legislative and Public Affairs, Andrea Zurich, Director of Fund Administration, Paula Beauchamp, Director of Major Projects, and Carrie Schindler, Director of Transit and Rail. I'll first turn to Paula to provide a brief overview of projects that are in construction today. Paula, please.
Well, thank you, Ray. Good morning, everyone. So nice to see you. As many in the audience know, and mostly because of your participation, our project delivery program at SBCTA goes through cycles. The cycles change as projects move from one phase to the next. Can you hear me? Okay, all right, just want to make sure. All right, we have basically a construction focused program right now, and I'll tell you about some of those important projects. We also have some projects that are moving into the design phase. So with that note, let's go ahead and begin highlighting just a few of our projects and facts that make them interesting. For example, one of the biggest projects we have in our program, and one of the most significant, or one of the more significant projects in our for our agency's history, is the I-10 corridor project. Overall, this project is just under $1 billion and introduces the first express lane system to our county. When you couple that with our future I-15 express lane project, it'll blend in well with a growing network of express lanes through Southern California's region. And needless to say, you know, this project is located on the heaviest commuted corridor in the county, and it goes through 3 major cities in the West Valley. Needless to say, it's very complicated, and it requires a great deal of coordination effort, primarily because it folds in several improvements. It constructs an express lane facility, it widens the freeway, it improves interchanges, and it rehabs the pavement. So we're excited that this offering of reliable trip times and extended congestion relief will be available to the public in 2023. But it doesn't end there. We're closing the gap on the eastern end of State Route 210 in San Bernardino, Highland, and Redlands. We're adding a lane to this heavily used commute corridor and access route to our mountain communities, and it'll go a long way to shorten the overall commute times in the area while making access to these recreational destinations more available and less daunting. So besides the I-10 and State Route 210, we have interchange projects on State Route 60. One is at Central and the other is at Archibald. They're both underway in construction, and they represent a long-standing need to improve the operational efficiencies of both those southern access points, namely Ontario and Chino. But one of the more interesting challenges on our table is the reconstruction of the Mount Vernon Viaduct in the city of San Bernardino. SBCTA was brought in to help deliver this project because of our reputation for delivery. This project had been, or the bridge itself had been slowly declining. And in fact, in 2014, the city had to place shoring to maintain it open to traffic, excluding commercial traffic. As time progressed in 2014, that same shoring had to be updated. So it was a much needed project. It's a very unique project in that it spans 22 sets of tracks, which have 3 operators, BNSF, Metrolink, and Amtrak. One thing to keep in mind is this bridge is very important to the community as it's a primary link between the north and the south on the west side of the city. In fact, it's not just vehicles. There are approximately 300 pedestrians a day that use this bridge. So this is quite an important project for the city. Since they've upgraded the shoring in 2014, unfortunately, we've been witness to chunks of concrete that have been continuing to fall from the bridge's outer edges. So the problem was that we needed to rebuild this bridge, and we needed to do it before it fell down. So one of the things we looked at was the design build procurement. And so that is another interesting fact about design build on a local street. This project, because in order to standardize it, we would have to build a longer and a wider bridge, which in turn would impact some of the residents in our area. In fact, there were 42 residential properties adjacent to the railroad that were required for the project. And I'm happy to report of those homes, 10 previously were occupied by owners, but as a result of SBCTA appropriately implementing the Uniform Act, home ownership has jumped from 10 to 21 families. Finally, another interesting fact about this project is that it's situated in a community that it needs the partnership between industry and education. So with the help of Mr. Greer, who pulled his contacts together, SBCTA has kicked off a partnership with the Alliance in San Bernardino, who provides to SBC an audience of San Bernardino County educators. We began by explaining who we are and why it's important to SBC that we work towards the development of our next generations. Our first technical video that can be used in the classroom consists of a geotechnical engineer explaining the importance of geotechnical explorations as we stood next to a drill rig that was actually working on the project. Our design builder plans to introduce other elements of work through design and construction activities. And of course, the one that's expected is the presentation of the bridge demolition plans and the execution of that plan. I'll turn it back over to you, Ray.
So Paula, let's talk a little bit more about the Mount Vernon Viaduct. You mentioned that we're using design build procurement for this, but my understanding is that's not allowed per state law. Can you explain a little bit first about why we made that decision, and then we can dig a little bit deeper into how we got to be able to use it?
Well, when I first was introduced to the project, I was told that we had to have it in construction by the end of 2020. Thank you, Ray.
Told you that.
So with that in mind, and then, you know, the more that we researched the bridge and the more chunks that we saw, and, you know, the fact that we have workers working under that bridge, you know, really made it necessary for us to look for a way to access that bridge sooner than later. So we have had experience in design build, and the fact that we could possibly demolish the bridge sooner under a design build contract was quite interesting, because we would be able to improve our safety through the area. In working on design build projects, we also understood that we had to introduce legislation in order to move forward. So when we looked at the current design build legislation, we actually found that there is a carve out for local street improvements. So in order to get around that, we brought in Mr. Greer and his team, and SBCTA, he can talk more about it, but actually introduced legislation which was passed to allow us to move forward with the design build procurement on this project.
So I think this really highlights the importance of our organizational structure, having a department focused on legislative and public affairs. Otis, can you briefly describe the process that was entailed in reaching out to the legislature and asking them to do something for us, that is, pass legislation that allowed us to use design build procurement in this specific case? that in turn allowed Paula to deliver on the commitment she made to me to get this project under construction at the end of this year.
Absolutely. So I think anyone who's had an opportunity to drive near the depot and see the state of the viaduct bridge, it's an easy sell for a member to take a look at that, especially those who have some connection to San Bernardino County and want to assist in reforming that. Now, for those who are acutely aware, there are a lot of concerns from different engineering groups, PEG in particular, about design build being an overreach. But it was through our work in Sacramento and taking Dr. Ray up to meet with some of the members of the different committees and having a frank and good conversation with PEG that this was truly an important project. It was a design build methodology that would be necessary to help us getting this project done quickly. And we were able to get their support. We were able to secure their non-opposition, if that's the way to phrase it, which allowed the bill to be successfully passed. Most bills of this nature, when they are very regionally focused and very narrow in nature and designed to only affect a singular project, make it a little easier for us to address it. So this was a little bit of a lift in the design build conversation, but the project spoke for itself.
Yeah, thank you, Otis. Very exciting stuff. I'm going to turn to Carrie now, since we're talking about innovation. And I want to ask Carrie, we've heard the acronym ZEMU thrown about for quite a while. I suspect that many in the audience today have heard us speak about it because we did talk about it last year. But can you kind of give us an update on where we are with the pilot zero emission multiple unit?
Yeah, so ZEMU stands for Zero Emission Multiple Unit. It was developed out of, we are first introducing, new passenger rail service with diesel multiple units. And so for a number of years, we worked to secure outside funding that would allow us to take those diesel multiple units and transition them to a zero emission multiple unit. So we were able to receive full funding for that grant request. It did come with a few more unfunded requirements, but it's still very much a worthwhile project. As of right now, we do a lot of early meetings because most of the engineers are in Switzerland, so it's very exciting. We have representation from Australia, from Germany, from Switzerland, from America, and England. So it's quite a robust group of technical experts working on this project. We have just completed conceptual design. So basically, what is it going to look like? These trains have 2 passenger cabs on either end and a power cab in the middle. And we're basically pulling out the diesel generators and putting in an alternative propulsion system. And I just need to recognize the SBCTA board when we put together the feasibility study looking at what type of technology we should go with. The board did unanimously approve a hybrid battery hydrogen fuel cell system that will give us flexibility as we look to the future and expanded use. If we were looking at just a short corridor, probably, well, it would have been simpler to go with batteries, but when we look out to the future and flexibility we want and the usability of this new prototype, which will transition into a standard vehicle, we really wanted that ability to push it, have it go longer, and have it carry more passenger cabs. So we just completed conceptual design. We're in the midst of preliminary design, and then final design will progress after that. We will complete that in the spring, and then they will go into manufacturing the vehicle in Switzerland. They will test the vehicle first in Europe towards the end of 2022 calendar year into 2023. And then in the fall of 2023, the vehicle is scheduled to be delivered to the United States, and we will begin testing in the United States. I would just highlight all along the way, coordination and consultation with Federal Railroad Administration is paramount. And that is probably our longest lead time item to make sure we can end up with what's called a letter of concurrence to operate the prototype vehicle.
So Carrie, I want to first congratulate you again. You mentioned this is the first of its kind in North America. We are drawing on technologies that have been employed elsewhere in the world, but it'll be the first of its kind to bring all of these technologies to bear in one vehicle in the world as well. So great job. Thanks for your leadership there. You know, it's often reported in the paper that you're doing some other exciting things, namely a tunnel connection between the Metrolink system in Rancho Cucamonga and Ontario International Airport. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. So I think, you know, transit is desired, it seems. You know, it becomes politicized and it's very important we look to the future. And as our freeways, well, Paula does a fantastic job. I mean, what a robust program, right, of projects that are in construction. We need to have another option, right, to move people around. One of those areas is providing a direct connection between the existing transit network and the airport to ensure as that airport grows, you know, Ontario International Airport, which was the fastest growing airport pre-COVID and has actually continued to do well, especially on the cargo side. How do we manage the congestion coming into that airport? That was a commitment when local control was returned for the airport. And so we did a study looking at surface rail connections, whether they be the DMU or ZEMU type, smaller heavy rail passenger train or light rail. And they came at a price tag of over $1 billion. It also isn't a project that's identified in our measure. So we started down a path of doing an alternative analysis in an effort to position ourselves for securing a large FTA grant. During that process, we did receive an unsolicited proposal that, based on advancements in tunnel technology, indicated that there could be a more cost-effective way to provide that connection. Again, the board acted quickly, digested the information and provided direction to us to go and seek a alternative procurement structure that would allow that project to be delivered quickly. So we are in the midst of the procurement for both an RFP for program management, construction management services, and we are targeting bringing that to our board the first week of December. And then also, there's also a request for qualifications that is currently out for a design, build, operate, maintain contract that, as much as possible, could be turnkey, ensuring that we're doing our adequate oversight and following the applicable laws and regulations to ensure we do it in the right way. I think the biggest component that is driving the schedule will be what level of environmental document is needed. And of course, that can't be predetermined. But depending on what level of document is required, we would like to deliver the project by the end of 2024. And that the timing of that connects with some of the other exciting things that we have going on in our county.
So thank you, Carrie. I think another looming challenge for that particular project relates to funding, right? And so, Andrea, I'll direct this question to you. Since a transit connection to Ontario International Airport was not identified in Measure I, how are we dealing with that fact? What are we going to do?
Well, it is difficult. SBCTA is responsible for allocating all of the most of the transit funding available from state and federal sources to the operators in our county. So we're constantly monitoring the availability of those funds to make sure that the systems we have in place can continue to operate and are sustainable. So while, you know, this alternative method of getting to the airport is a fraction of what we had been looking at before in a rail connection, it still was a large hit to our transit funding. And so the other thing that plays into it is the timing. You know, this is a project that we think we could deliver quickly, but it's happening at the same time as our extension of rail to Redlands. We haven't talked about the West Valley Connector project in the western part of our county, but we have several large transit projects that are underway that are requiring a lot of our capital resources in the near term. And so what our board has decided to do is basically dedicate everything that we think we have available over the next several years toward this project. And then we plan to seek grant funding for the balance. The state is very focused on innovative transit solutions, and we feel like this will be well received by the state and some of the grant opportunities that we anticipate in the next several years. But the other side of transit funding that's unique to the projects that SBCTA delivers is that it's a long-term commitment, because we also have to set aside funding for operations. And that has been a limit so far as to how much we can expand those transit options in our county. The funding available for operations is very limited. And so with this project, we've basically dedicated everything we anticipate to be available for operations through 2040 to ensure that we can move this project forward.
Thank you, Andrea. You just really heard some insight into the important work that Andrea and her team in fund administration perform on a daily basis. This was just on one project. If you look at our 10-year delivery plan, you can imagine the stress that her group has to endure. Carrie, if I could just turn back to you for a moment, since we're talking about connectivity in Rancho Cucamonga, can you talk a little bit more about the privately funded rail extension that we're having conversations about, and what that potentially means to the Rancho Cucamonga Metrolink station with connectivity right now with Metrolink and local bus service. But what's that potentially going to look like in a very short few years?
Sure, yeah. So most of you have probably heard, Brightline, formerly Express West, has decided to advance a phase 2 that connects the Victor Valley to the Rancho Cucamonga Metrolink station via the I-15 corridor and then the existing rail corridor. Prior to that happening, we did have a good idea that the direct connection would come to the airport would come out of Rancho Cucamonga, and then the project that Andrea mentioned, the West Valley Connector, it's a bus rapid transit project that we're advancing. It also has a stop there, an important stop connecting the airport and the existing rail line. So what's happened with the synergy of privately funded high-speed rail coming into that station is we're really going to have a robust transit hub there. We're going to have bus rapid transit service. We already have the fantastic Metrolink service on the San Bernardino line that has really good regular service and plans to enhance that in the future as funding becomes available. And now we have the private high-speed rail coming in. And I would say it's been a challenge because they move quickly, right? And they have the resources. So I think the challenge is keeping up with them to ensure we do everything to not hold them up, right? We want to invite that private investment into our county. And what we're seeing is just a phenomenal transit hub being developed that brings several transit services together. Thanks, Tim. Tim just threw up the photo of it. So what you can see is there's an elevated structure with a very modern looking train. That would be the private high-speed rail train. Below that at grade in the background, you can see the Metrolink train. And then off to the left of your screen will be a basically passenger loading area that centralizes not only the tunnel connection for boardings and departures, but the West Valley Connector, as well as this station does have about a 15% drop-off rate. So we see a lot of people getting dropped off here. So we want to make sure we're accommodating that.
Thank you, Carrie. I appreciate your insight there. A lot of great things are happening in the transit world, and they're important because San Bernardino County continues to be a bedroom community. And that means that the pressures on I-10, State Route 60, and State Route 210, as well as I-15, will continue to grow as people are commuting to and from work and home. So what we're trying to do is provide options. We're not all about transit. We've talked a lot about transit here this morning already. I'm going to turn back to Paula now and just ask Paula for an update on the projects that are in development in her department.
Thank you, Ray. I thought I'd pull out a couple of exciting ones. I know that the Barton Road project just wrapped up in Grand Terrace. However, it's really kind of exciting to know it's the first roundabout in our county. And, you know, as you mentioned, and I did previously, we do have the express lanes network that we're going to be tying into. And one of the most exciting projects, I think, is our first divergent diamond interchange in our county. It's actually going to be the second one in the state. So we're right there at the beginning of the whole process. It's going to be located in San Bernardino at the I-15 and University Parkway. And this strategy will allow us to move significantly more vehicles through the interchange and reduce the overall footprint that's needed relative to the constrained area. I thought I'd throw in a fun fact about it, and that is currently, before COVID, we were measuring 85.2 seconds of delay on a particular ramp. And that same ramp in 2040, if we were to do nothing, would experience 327 seconds of delay. However, with the divergent diamond interchange, in 2040, the delay is expected to be only 28.3 seconds. So it's a significant improvement for a long term, despite being the fact that it's in a small constrained area. So as Cal State University and San Bernardino continues to grow, it's imperative that this interchange can facilitate that growth. So you couple that with some other projects that are coming up, like the I-10 truck climbing lane, I-10 Mount Vernon interchange, I-10 Cedar Avenue interchange, and you can start to see that the next generation of construction projects coming to our already robust program. So that's what we have going. Ray.
Thank you, Paula. You're managing the largest program in our organization's history and doing a fantastic job. But considering the fact that you've got such a large program, what are some of the hurdles that you're concerned about?
Well, quite frankly, the first one comes from my heart, and that is the safety of our workers. You know, we have these construction projects out on freeways where some of the drivers tend to drive at rates that are faster than the speed limit, and we are making extraordinary efforts, you know, to put up additional signage and notify the public of when our efforts are going to be occurring. However, we still have a few individuals who are not driving safely through our areas, so I'm concerned for our workers. That's number one. Number two, what I'm finding on many of our projects that they have right-of-way limitations. And what's happening is the cost of right-of-way is increasing. And so now the cost of right-of-way relative to the construction cost is somewhat troublesome to our projects. Along with that, of course, is the uncertainty of future funding. And I think Andrea already elaborated on that and may have some more to share. And then finally, you know, looking out to the future, I'm concerned about our workforce. You know, I hear it from various different entities, whether they be engineering firms, professional service firms, contractors, unions. I hear the same message, you know, that they have the same concern. And so, you know, working with the school district, hopefully we can help, you know, develop conversations that'll lead to some sort of program where we can all work together to develop our workforce.
So I think you talked about the partnership with the school district relative to the Mount Vernon Viaduct earlier this morning. And I think that's just a fantastic example of, again, innovation as we try to continue to engage the public to the extent possible and you know, opening new opportunities in kids' minds, I think is really fantastic. So thank you for your leadership. Andrea, I'll turn to you. Paula and Carrie just highlighted a fairly robust program. Do we have the funding streams to advance all of these priorities, especially in the timeframes that they've identified?
Well, let me start by highlighting our 10-year delivery plan that we adopt every 2 years. It's a good resource for people interested in what they can expect to see going on throughout our county as far as construction projects. The last plan was adopted in June 2019, and it had 60 projects throughout the county that totaled almost $4.5 billion of investment over the next 10 years. And the majority of those projects included in the plan, we expected to complete construction by 2025. So it's a massive effort between SBCTA and local jurisdictions. And in developing this plan, we typically choose to bond for projects so that we can advance those, get them out on the streets ahead of the funding availability. And with the adoption of this plan, we were planning to expend almost all of the Measure I funds that we were expecting to collect through 2040 for our larger construction programs. So it was a massive investment. And what we have going on right now with the economy, we haven't been through this in recent times. We had a strong recovery from the recession in 2010, but we've never been through a pandemic like we're going through right now from a local sales tax perspective. And actually, we haven't seen quite the negative impact that we were expecting. Certain sectors of the economy have been hit very hard by the lockdown and business restrictions, but there are other sectors that have seen increases that are balancing things out for us. So actually, our sales tax revenue is slightly higher than it was last year, but it's not at the level we were expecting when we developed our last 10-year delivery plan. So, the question for us as far as revenue streams is, how long is this going to last? And what happens if there isn't another round of stimulus funding for our residents that have experienced job loss? What happens if more businesses are forced to close? And what happens when the moratorium on rent forgiveness ends? There's a lot coming forward in the economy that we don't know what the impact is going to be. So, I guess the bottom line and looking forward with our funding is that, well, it feels like we've been sitting through this for a long time at home right now. We're still relatively early in knowing the long-term financial impacts. But we have been encouraged so far by what we've seen in our sales tax receipts.
Thank you, Andrea. It sounds like one thing we can be certain of is the uncertainty of our traditional revenue streams. How will that affect our program from a scope and schedule perspective? Do we anticipate that we're going to have to move things around? I'll ask Andrea first, and then Paula and Carrie, if you need to step in, please go ahead.
From the funding perspective, we anticipate that our worst case scenario for projects in the pipeline would be shifting of schedules to fit the money that's available. We don't expect to have to cancel projects. We certainly are not expecting projects under construction to be affected. But we'll be looking at these funding plans with a much more critical eye in our update to the 10-year delivery plan that's planned over the next year. And we'll be looking at ways to maximize opportunities, beyond what has been our traditional funding strategy. There are flexibilities in our measure that allow us that will hopefully allow us to keep on delivering these projects so that we can continue to provide infrastructure, jobs, and improvements to our county that are so important right now as we look to restart the economy. In the last plan, we had intended to bond in 2022 to advance projects in the interchange program. I think we had 13 projects in development in the last delivery plan over the next 5 to 10 years. And because of this, long-term uncertainty on the financial outlook, we may be looking at opportunities to borrow between some programs internally instead to allow us more time for the economy to stabilize. Also, some of our programs with the local jurisdictions require contributions of developer fees, which may not be coming in at the rate we had anticipated right now. So we'll be working with the local jurisdictions to ensure that they have other sources of funds to bring to the table or to arrange internal loans for those developer fees just to keep the projects going. Ultimately, our goal is to deliver to our board the best information we know now so that they can make decisions on priorities and the level of risk we're willing to take through bonding, borrowing, or reprioritization of our projects.
Carrie, Paula,
So for me, basically our approach is basically to look at, as Andrea somewhat ended the conversation, is discussing with local jurisdictions, is looking to see what they have, whether we have the matching source, but also what we've recently done in the last couple of years is partner with Caltrans, who's been able to contribute. And so we've been able to have improvements performed with various funding sources that were different projects before and that were now cobbled together. I think on the other part of my program, which includes freeways, we're looking at what elements could be delivered sooner than a construction project. Perhaps some large right-of-way projects, that clear utilities, maybe by some permanent acquisition, at these rates now, on our projects that are cleared. So we're looking at that now. We're going to be putting together a plan, and then as our plan develops, hopefully we can use that to work with Andrea on the next 10-year delivery plan to see what elements can move forward earlier, and then hopefully it'll allow us to gain a little bit of savings for some of the bigger construction expenses that would be coming after.
I would just add on the transit and rail side, we look at it as we are dependent on outside grant funding. I mean, there's always a strategy for the large capital projects. And so what that requires is that the strong team behind delivering these projects, right? You guys all know it takes years, is they have to keep the motivation up, knowing that that unknown is out there. And I've seen that I've seen our consultant teams and our internal staff perform really well under that condition. So like West Valley Connector, we're dependent on securing grant funding, and we'll find out the first one in end of November and December. So that team has to continue to push hard to deliver the project and watch carefully before we take that step to start acquiring right away, right? Because we need to know that grant funding comes in. So it's having the right attitude to keep up that desire to advance as quickly as possible and live within the funding constraints that are very much a reality.
All right, thank you. Otis, I'm going to turn to you now. We will hopefully put to rest the ongoing speculation and looming political uncertainty next Tuesday. Regardless of the outcome of the election, what can we do collectively to ensure that a new highway transportation bill is passed quickly to bring clarity to federal funding? And when I say collectively, all of us present in the meeting today.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think it's important that we look at advocacy in Sacramento and in Washington, D.C., similar to the way that the county has taken approaches toward addressing some of the social contracts with our local residents, and that's the collective impact model. I think if we looked at advocacy in a collective format, we'd probably have a much stronger voice. One of the things that happens is members of the legislature tend to hear from very few voices and from very few voices across the spectrum. In this case, when it's related to transportation funding, they tend to hear from agencies like SBCTA, our counterparts at RCTC, OCTA, or LA Metro. Sometimes they'll hear from from some of our construction partners, from some of our union partners and others. But if they heard from members across the business spectrum, private, public, agency, it certainly has a tremendous effect on their thinking about what's important to these local communities. And so one of the things that we do is keep very public our priorities through a board approved list of legislative priorities identified in our platform, both at the state and at the federal level. And that's available on our website for anyone who's interested in reviewing it. It gives you a bird's eye view of our thinking about the type of projects or the type of funding sources that we'll be looking at, how we will look to protect funding that is coming to the county, to transportation, to our region, and our ability to maintain those uses as our board dictates their need. But it requires it takes a village. It truly takes a village. And so the more support we can get in lobbying, in reaching out, in making phone calls and sending letters and supporting legislation at the state level and at the federal level is truly helpful in accomplishing some of these objectives.
So I've just got really one last statement question, perhaps, before we turn over to Q&A from the audience. Don't know that we've had too many questions received yet, so I would encourage the audience, if you've got questions of the panelists, please submit them to Tim Watkins as quickly as you can now. Otis, you kind of touched on this already in the general sense of state and federal funding legislation. We're hopeful that there will be another COVID relief bill, and Andrea spoke to that as well. What can we do as an agency to try to help to push that? And more importantly, if we think back to 2007, 2008, when we were entering the Great Recession, and the administration at that time in Congress were debating a sort of recovery act that became known as ERA. Initially, a lot of the focus was on transportation as a priority, as an economic stimulus. But as we all know, transportation ended up receiving less than 4% of the entire funding package. And so how do we change that dynamic and try to prop up transportation to make sure that it really is truly a priority? Because we all know, as we work in this industry, how many people are employed with the few dollars that do roll through transportation.
So a couple things that I think serve as somewhat of bright spots. You did allude to the lack of funding that came out of packages in 2008. However, in 2015, the FAST Act was established at the federal level, and the House has unveiled a close to $500 billion package to extend the FAST Act that expired last month. So there's some hope that the feds still see the significance of infrastructure. Now, back to the election that's taking place next week. Chairman DeFazio, who has championed the new extension of the transportation funding, is in a close competitive race. And if he loses, who assumes that seat and who begins to take up that mantle on the Senate side? Should there be a shift? The ranking member, Maria Cantwell, is also from the Pacific Northwest. So there's an opportunity potentially to have two members of the West Coast chairing both the House and Senate transportation process, which could certainly be helpful in seeing more funding come that way for those of us here. So we can continue to support them and lobby their efforts by sending letters. I think what many of you may have seen if you're involved in organizations such as SCAG, Mobility 21, or any other transportation-related organizations, is that we are all heavily engaged with the process of these bills as they're being mocked up. HR 2, the bill that Chairman DeFazio would like to see put through actually is thought of as a placeholder. And so many of us hustled to try to get our thoughts into it as quickly as possible, believing that once or if the bill were to be taken up again in the next session, that the things that are in it currently would be thought of as just status quo and should be left alone. So there was a lot of work done ahead of time. We believe there's still a lot more to do. In terms of what's going to happen now, the Senate, having confirmed the most recent Supreme Court justice, has taken time off until after the election, so they won't return until the 9th. So I think hopes for additional support are kind of lean at this point until after the elections are concluded. But I'm a firm believer that that there is a lot of focus and emphasis on infrastructure, because there's no better way in the minds of many members of the state and federal legislature of getting folks back to work, of stimulating the economy, than to put money into the repair and development of infrastructure and transit programs.
Thank you, Otis. What I heard was a call to action. Our collective voice is much more powerful than our individual voices. Otis spoke about Mobility 21. Not everybody is a participant in Mobility 21, but we need everybody's help to make sure that transportation investment at the federal level and the state level in Southern California remains a priority. So thank you for that. I'm going to turn now to questions from the audience. The first question is from Hal Schillinger. The question is, how rigorous are the air and water quality regulations, and how do they affect schedule and cost? And so I will turn to Paula and Carrie to ask that question.
I'll start. You know, air quality regulations obviously are extremely important. The way that it's affected the transit projects, I'll give an example, is we really have to focus on zero emission technology. You know, we're seeing implementation of what's called Tier 4 diesel engines in much of the rail, heavy rail industry. However, I really believe we are on very soon, which you've seen in recent executive orders, you know, we're going to be pushed to go further. And there's not a lot between Tier 4 and 0. So we need to be working on that and planning projects accordingly. West Valley Connector didn't start out as zero emission. It started out as CNG. With the help of a grant from the state, we transitioned that project, you know, to zero emission buses. So planning accordingly and taking that into account is very important. The water regulations and water quality side, I mean, you have to have talented consultants helping you that are technically strong to ensure we are complying with them, and make sure that you're building the appropriate costs into the project to address the requirements. One of the areas that's been most challenging, I would say, on the FTA projects is when we cross like a Army Corps of Engineer facility, you know, and we're doing dual environmental documents. That is one area that I really wish we could see a change in, because I don't think it's the best use of our limited resources. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Paula.
Thanks, Carrie. For me, at getting out of the gate, you know, we live in a non-attainment area, you know, air quality. And so, you know, there are certain projects we just can't do. We can't add capacity, you know, on our projects. So it's having to go through and understand what it is. Are we improving operations, and work through that, and then work closely with SCAG and others to make sure that we can get air quality conformity through our projects and complete our environmental documents. Yeah, we've had issues with Tier 4, mostly because it seemed that there was a push to advance Tier 4 requirements prior to legislation when it would be in effect fully. I think that's what Carrie was alluding to. And so that's been another issue. The water quality, I think where that comes into play with us is mostly our sweet pea requirements, making sure that we meet the Regional Water Quality Control Board requirements, which of course begins with our plan and implementation and maintenance of our plan. And that is usually a challenge to assure that that we have compliance with that. And the last thing we want to do is be fined on any of our projects for that. Again, I think you're right, Carrie, there are other environmental issues that come to play that could impact our projects as well. And so we're always watchful for that. In fact, we have someone who does nothing but watch for changes in legislation in terms of the environmental regulation so that we can try to not be halted in our tracks. Or I'm halted in my lane, sorry.
Very good. Hey, thank you very much. Hal, that was a great question. Carrie, I just want to do a quick follow-up on that. I think Hal's focus was on the project delivery side of things, but going back for a moment to the zero emission multiple unit and what that potentially means, not just to aero service between downtown San Bernardino and Redlands, but can you expand a little bit on ZEMU and its potential application and how that could help the air quality issues here in Southern California?
Sure. So I'll cover it on two areas. One is, we are advancing, and the first prototype train you'll see out there is a 2-car consist, but every step of the way in the design process and even development of the contract documents, the goal was to produce a vehicle, a ZEMU, that could power a 4-car consist and run at least 2 round trips to LA Union Station. And as we've progressed, and so to us, that is, we're seeking to ensure the project has flexibility, right? And so we might have a test bed here in San Bernardino County that's 9 miles. We want to ensure we do everything we can to harness the process we have in place to make that vehicle as viable as possible for the breadth of the Metrolink system. And that is what is pushing the day-to-day decisions now. And that's important because when you look out to the future, we want to have the right size trains running at the right time. I think there's definitely a place for the large locomotive haul coaches that you currently see operated, and we do see them. Pre-COVID, they were full, during peak times. But we want to infill that service with these more efficient trains. And it's even better if we can do it with trains that have zero emission at the tailpipe. And I say that zero emission at the tailpipe because the other piece to it is growing the supply of hydrogen fuel within the state, which with the interjection of some of the regulations, especially on the zero emission bus side, you are seeing advance very quickly. And a key piece of that is what percentage of that fuel that is produced is renewable. And so you're seeing that climb, and you see that become more and more prominent in the discussions. And so it's both those pieces, ensuring the prototype is viable and ensuring we're continuing to push towards renewable hydrogen fuel.
Thank you. Otis, I believe there was recent legislation signed into law by Governor Newsom. Could you talk a little bit about SB 288?
Yeah, SB 288 was established or was drafted by Senator Weiner from Northern California. It essentially is not primarily a transportation bill. His primary focus as chairman of the Senate Housing Committee was on working on low-income or more affordable housing and providing transit access as a part of the housing formula, which is the platform provided by SB 375, which really linked transportation to affordable housing back in 2009. The thought is, if you provide great transit options connected to affordable housing, it will bring folks off of the freeway and onto different transit systems. But in order to expedite this, he saw that CEQA exemptions would be necessary in order to expedite some of those transportation projects being built in connection with affordable housing. So we're fortunate that many of the goals and objectives align with some of the projects that we're working on. And so we were very supportive of anything that provides us an opportunity to quickly get projects past the environmental phase and into the actual construction phase. And so 288 is a great vehicle that we'll be looking to do a little more research on what the actual regulatory bodies think of it and how we'll be able to implement it on some of our projects, including the upcoming tunnel and maybe even some of our station improvements in Rancho Cucamonga.
Thank you. Before I get to a question from Susie Bravo, this is the last question that we have for the panelists, and I'd hate to call out specific names of folks in the audience, for example, Bernie, Kay, Carol, and Doug. So I encourage a few more questions. You've got a great opportunity here to ask questions of some of the most brilliant people in Southern California. So Susie Bravo asks, when will construction management procurement come out for the DDI at University in 215, the I-15 express lanes, and the intermodal facility? So I'll turn to Paula initially for that.
Well, for the DDI, we plan to go to construction at the beginning of 2022. So we would like to have a CM on board in 2021 so they can help us with constructability review and advertising the project. For the I-15, we have a hard start date in construction of 2023. So I would anticipate the end of 2022 is when we would look to have CM firm on board. So meaning probably about fall of 2022, we'd probably start looking for CM firms.
So Carrie, I'm assuming the intermodal facility references the new transit center that we're considering in Rancho Cucamonga.
So the rendering that you saw that Tim put up on the screen for us, that is all going to be built by the private entity. As it is now, we have an existing bus facility there. And so we have to plan accordingly for the improvements related to the West Valley connector, and we're going to coordinate that effort. As I spoke to earlier, the direct connector to the airport, the tunnel, that RFQ is currently out for a design, build, operate, maintain contract. And that shortlist will be available late December, early January, and then we will start going into the request for proposal process with the draft coming out in March.
So Catherine Oten has asked a specific question with the tunnel itself. What transit mode is planned for operations in the tunnel?
Yeah, so how we laid it out is definitely zero emission and preferred rubber tire. So as we go through the RFQ process, it's what we call like an RFQ plus. We're seeking narratives from the industry to bring solutions and opportunities to us. But those are kind of the key components: zero emission, preferred rubber tire. We excluded third rail and we excluded catenary due to safety and costs associated with those. We do have a strong preference that while the operation may not be able to be implemented with autonomous vehicles, the clear goal is that the system be able to transition to autonomous vehicles and that it be designed in a way that it is non-proprietary. So we have opportunity in the future to change who the operator may be.
Okay, thank you. Catherine's got a follow-up question wanting to know, Paula, where she can learn more about the Alliance for Education. Before you answer that, I'm certain that either Dina or Darren have got additional questions. Please, Paula.
Okay. Well, the truth of the matter is I would contact Otis Greer. We have been speaking with two individuals at the Alliance directly that can help us. We have Michael Richard and Dr. Tashima. And so maybe offline I can forward that contact information or along with the video here.
Yeah,
Days?
that's correct. And they can absolutely reach out to me. Uh, the project is certainly going to be primarily in the hands of the Alliance as they're managing the educational component and how that's distributed to the schools throughout San Bernardino County. We're simply providing the platform, the project, and the expertise through Paula's team of how STEM concepts are implemented in real world projects. But we certainly will be happy to include that as a part of our information that we can share with you. Also, we'd encourage any firms or teams working on projects, if you're interested in engaging in something similar, the Alliance is always looking for businesses to provide that type of expertise for their instructors to teach the future engineers, the future practitioners of in the county using local talent. So please feel free to reach out if you have an interest in lending your own expertise.
Okay. Appreciate that response. Bernie, I do appreciate your question. That'll be the next one. When will we see phase 2 of express lanes on I-10?
Okay, thank you, Bernie, for your question. Actually, I somewhat touched on it. What we are doing is this is definitely on our minds, and we are planning to look at what high-risk elements for the next phase 2 can we start sooner than later. And the reason we're approaching it in this manner is because it dovetails with what Andrea was talking about in funding and timing of funding and types of funds that can be used on this type of work. So I can't give you a definitive date when we will be in construction on it, but actually right now we are already thinking about it and planning for how to approach it.
Okay, thank you. I do want to recognize, I'm just looking through some of the participants here and affording them an opportunity to provide questions. So I want to recognize Gail Farber. I haven't seen you in a long time. Great to see you participating, Gail. Farzad, good to see you, my friend. Ernie, thank you. I do have a question from Tanya. Is SBCTA tracking autonomous vehicle technology and how it plays into our future?
So I'll go ahead and take that one, unless Paula, did you want to?
No, go ahead.
So we're predominantly tracking it through our planning department, and we have done some workshops on it. I think it's a very interesting development process. I mean, I see when I talk to, experts in the field, I do see vast differences in how quickly they think it can be implemented. I think like our place to be, especially with the tunnel, is to make sure we're putting forth a project that can take advantage of that technology and we don't preclude it. And Ray, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that.
No, I think, it's something we have had conversations with our board over the last number of years now about a potential extension of the motorized sales tax. And one of the important elements of that conversation has to be the rapid acceleration of technological advances, and autonomous vehicle technology is a component of that. So one of the things that we have laid out is our current expenditure plan is very prescriptive, and it really had to be in order to secure the voters' support. But as we look to the future, I'm not sure that we can be as prescriptive, because we fully expect that things are going to change rapidly. And 10 years from now, project priorities that we outline today may no longer be relevant. And so that's an ongoing conversation. The rapid acceleration and advancement of technology is something that has made my beard grow gray, but it's still exciting nonetheless. I have another question here from Ernie. Morning, Ernie. What projects are planned for the high desert? So I think, Paula, I'll turn to you.
Presently, we have one project planned, and that is the First Street Bridge overcrossing. It actually is very similar to the Mount Vernon Viaduct in that it crosses over a BNSF rail yard as well. So that one we're working on. We're hoping to have in construction next summer, but right now we're dealing with the BNSF and some agreements, and then we need to go through and seek our funding through the state for that particular project. So we're hopeful, but we'll see how it works out. So that's our desert project.
And Ray, could I also point out in that in the measure, the programs in the high desert are very different from the programs in the valley, where, you know, in the valley, we have a freeway program, an interchange program, a rail program. In the high desert, the programs are locally driven. And so you see a lot more regional projects there, maybe on regional routes within the high desert. So I know the city of Hesperia is getting ready to advertise widening of the Ranchero corridor, and the city of Victorville is ready to advertise the construction of a Green Tree extension. But the project, the Measure I projects that you'll see in our desert areas are very different from the ones you see coming forward in the valley, just because of the nature of the programs out there.
Well, thank you. As we get ready to wrap up now, first of all, Darren Johnson had one closing question, and that is just how can consultants help? And I think Otis talked about it from the context of legislative advocacy, both at the state and federal level. You've heard from Paula and from Carrie the extent of the program that we have in front of us. We're a very small organization, and we rely very heavily on the expertise that you and your teams bring to the table. And so just continue to keep tabs on what we're doing and, you know, offer your services and your assistance and advocacy to make sure that we're successful in San Bernardino County, but also throughout Southern California to really improve the quality of life and the mobility choices that our residents have and our businesses need. So with that, I can tell you that this has been a much easier group to moderate than the recent presidential debate. So I want to thank panelists for that. Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists. They are leading tremendous change while remaining focused on the commitments our forebears made to the voters when Measure I was renewed at the turn of the century. Think about that, almost 20 years ago, 16 years ago in 2004. All of this during the most challenging time we have faced yet in our careers. As we conclude the panel discussion, I would like to thank all of you for actively participating. And I certainly hope that this virtual event was beneficial to you. I completely understand virtual event fatigue, but hopefully we added value to your morning. Your time is valuable, your expertise invaluable, and our partnership strong as we endeavor to lift ourselves out of this crazy reality and envision a brighter future, hopefully just around the corner. President Navarro.
Thank you, Ray. And in closing, allow me to thank you on behalf of myself, President of SBCTA, and my colleagues on the Board of Directors for joining and staying with us during the virtual presentation of 2020 State of Transportation in San Bernardino County. It is an exciting and challenging time to be president of SBCTA in seeing all the current and future projects that SBCTA is working on and planning with an eye to the future, a future that will bring growth in population by 500,000 people, 250,000 jobs, and 370,000 registered vehicles over the next 25 years. With that, SBCTA is committed to working towards meeting the needs of our residents in transportation and transit. We will work aggressively in obtaining the funding necessary to meet that goal through our state and federal elected officials and all grant programs available to us. We will also look into new innovations and technology that will help in making those goals a reality. And with that, my thanks go out to Ray, our executive director, and his superior staff for putting on this excellent event together for us today. And again, to all of the participants, all of you visiting with us, thank you. And at SBCTA, we plan, we build, and you move. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you, Mayor Navarro. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. Thank you, Ray. Thank you to all of our panel members. Thank you, everyone.
See you later.